What makes a leader great, according to political theory? Level C. 1. Advance. Great leadership has always been mysterious. History books try to measure it, societies try to define it, and philosophers try to explain it. Yet the core remains strangely intangible. A leader is not simply someone who gives orders or receives power. A leader is someone who transforms the meaning of power itself. Political theory, from Aristotle to modern statecraft scholars, agrees on one foundational truth. Leadership is not the ability to dominate others, but the ability to persuade, unify, and endure. Authority can be given. Legitimacy must be earned. This distinction is central. A president, king, general, or minister may possess titles, armies, or wealth. But greatness begins only when people follow, not because they must, but because they believe. Early philosophers were clear about this. Plato imagined the philosopher-king a ruler who seeks wisdom rather than personal gain. In his view, leadership must begin with self-mastery. One cannot guide a people if one is owned by desire, fear, pride, or impulse. Politics, in this sense, was not simply the management of citizens, but the discipline of the ruler. Aristotle continued this idea, but with a practical lens. For him, great leadership required virtue in action, fairness, courage, temperance, reason. A leader who chases glory becomes a tyrant. A leader who chases stability becomes a steward. The measure of greatness lies not in ambition, but in balance. Later, Machiavelli arrived with a colder view of human nature. He argued that people are unpredictable, emotional, easily influenced, and inconsistent. A great leader, therefore, must not only be virtuous, but also strategic. Morality alone cannot protect a nation. Cunning and realism must walk beside ethics. He did not celebrate cruelty, he studied reality. Sometimes, maintaining order and preventing chaos required decisions that could not be judged by conventional morality. Modern political theorists expanded this picture. Leadership became not a fixed role, but a relationship between the governed and the governing. Power without consent was unstable. Consent without competence was dangerous. A leader must embody both capability and trust. Crucially, political legitimacy is not built on speeches or slogans. It is built on consistency, the alignment between what one promises and what one does. A leader may inspire for a season with charisma, but only integrity sustains loyalty beyond the moment. The 20th century exposed this truth ruthlessly. Charismatic leaders rose quickly, igniting crowds and reshaping nations, yet many collapsed under their own myth. Some discovered that popularity is not endurance. Others found that rhetoric without governance becomes theater. Political theory, therefore, warns against confusing image with identity. A leader who is loved for spectacle becomes disposable when the spectacle fades. A leader who is respected for principle survives beyond admiration and even beyond their lifetime. The question of morality in leadership remains complex. Can a leader be both effective and ethical? Can one protect a nation without ever harming, disappointing, or restricting some portion of it? Theories disagree. Idealists insist that goodness and leadership must be inseparable. Realists argue that purity is impossible in statecraft because governing means choosing which imperfection is least destructive. Yet both camps recognize an identical core responsibility. A leader must see further than those they guide. This does not mean predicting economic charts or military threats, though both matter. It means perceiving the emotional, cultural, and psychological climate of a society, understanding what people fear, what they long for, what they refuse to admit. A leader is not simply a strategist. They are a mirror. Political theorists often return to one concept: the leader as symbol. A nation is too large, too diverse, too contradictory to unify itself spontaneously. But through a leader, a society sees a condensed version of its own identity. When leadership succeeds, citizens feel pride not in the leader, but in themselves. When leadership fails, the disappointment is not personal, it is existential. A failed leader makes people feel as though they have failed as a collective. This is why leadership carries weight beyond personality. It shapes how a nation sees its future, its past, and its moral center. Great leaders, according to political theory, do not simply solve problems. They define eras. They shift the invisible values of society: how justice is imagined, how equality is measured, how conflict is resolved, how strength and compassion coexist. This influence continues even after death. Churchill still shapes ideas of courage. Mandela shapes views of reconciliation. Gandhi shapes nonviolent resistance. Their leadership extended beyond administration into myth. And yet, political theory warns against romanticizing power. For every great leader, there are countless rulers who used charisma to manipulate, force to terrorize, ideology to divide. The difference lies in intention. A leader who seeks power to elevate themselves becomes history's cautionary tale. A leader who uses power to elevate others becomes its lesson. The greatest leaders understand the temporary nature of authority. They govern not to remain, but to leave wisely. Leadership reveals its true shape not in periods of calm, but in moments of crisis. History remembers leaders not for routine management, but for the seconds when a nation trembled, when the future was uncertain, and when a single decision carried the weight of millions. Crisis is the mirror in which greatness and inadequacy separate. A leader who fears loss of approval will collapse under pressure. A leader who fears only moral failure will hesitate and fail to act. Political theory insists that greatness lies between paralysis and violence, between indecision and domination. A leader must bear responsibility without being consumed by it. This balance is not natural. Power has gravitational force. It bends judgment, distorts self-perception, and encourages illusion. Every leader faces the same internal adversary: the belief that the nation exists to confirm their vision, rather than the reverse. Democracy complicates this further. In monarchies, power rested in bloodline. Legitimacy was automatic, even when disastrous. In democracies, legitimacy is conditional, constantly reevaluated, endlessly questioned. A democratic leader must persuade not just once during election season, but continually. Yet persuasion alone is not durability. Politicians rise quickly when they master rhetoric, but rhetoric cannot govern a complex state by itself. Charisma may open the door, but skill must walk through it. A society demands both emotional nourishment and structural competence. A leader who can speak to people's fears but cannot design systems will inspire briefly and fail permanently. A leader who can engineer systems but cannot speak to the soul will preserve order but never unite. Political theorists, therefore, describe leadership as a double craft: the management of institutions and the stewardship of meaning. A leader must hold both the map and the moral compass. The philosopher Hannah Arendt argued that the greatest danger to leadership is not corruption of money, but corruption of reality. Totalitarian figures do not begin by imprisoning bodies. They begin by confusing minds, replacing truth with narrative, turning politics into mythic theater. The population becomes obedient not through force, but through emotional intoxication. Thus, greatness is not merely the presence of vision, but the refusal to weaponize vision for personal immortality. In modern political systems, the question arises, is a great leader one who fulfills the will of the people, or one who guides the people toward what they cannot yet articulate? Consensus is not always wisdom. A crowd can desire comforting illusions rather than difficult truths. A leader who mirrors every impulse of the public becomes a performer, not a guide. The philosopher Rousseau believed the ideal leader is one who protects the general will, not the immediate will, the long-term health of society over the temporary passions of the moment. Leadership, then, is not pleasing the present, but protecting the future. But such protection is heavy. A leader must sometimes disappoint those they serve, must tighten where others wish to loosen, must speak honesty into ears that crave denial. The mature leader understands that popularity is a currency too unstable to serve as compass. Some decisions must be made with full awareness that gratitude will not follow. Political greatness, in its deepest sense, is the ability to act for generations not yet born. The end of leadership is just as telling as the beginning. Authoritarian figures cling to power as though it were oxygen, believing their departure would collapse the world they built. Truly great leaders recognize that permanence is not their mission. They depart before power begins to decay them, before reverence becomes entitlement. Political theorists often note that the most profound demonstration of leadership is the ability to relinquish authority gracefully. A leader who leaves at the right moment protects not only their legacy, but also the dignity of the state. Leadership is not a role one possesses. It is a trust one borrows. The transition of power reveals the foundation of governance. When a leader steps down and the society continues with stability, institutions prove stronger than the individual. When everything collapses in their absence, it suggests that what looked like leadership was merely control. Control is temporary. Stewardship endures. In the end, political theory suggests that a great leader is not simply one who commands or reforms, inspires or organizes, but one who enlarges the moral and intellectual capacity of a society. They leave citizens more capable than they found them, better listeners, more reflective voters, less controlled by fear, and more guided by principle. Great leaders do not create followers, they create adults. Their power is not measured by monuments, slogans, or parades, but by the quiet transformation of civic life. When people argue with more clarity, question with more depth, empathize with more maturity, and recognize that freedom is not a gift handed down but a responsibility shared. Leadership, at its highest level, is not the art of ruling others, but the art of raising them. Closing reflection. Political greatness is subtle. It is rarely glamorous. It does not always receive applause, but it reshapes what a nation considers possible. A leader is not remembered for their voice, but for the silence they leave the moment when the people realize that the society they now inhabit thinks, chooses, and hopes more wisely than before. True leadership ends not with dependence, but with dignity.